Shabbat Shalom. My name is Noel. Welcome, everybody. Hope you're happy to be here. I'm certainly happy to be here with you guys. And I'll get this out of the way right before I forget. I've got good news and I've got bad news. Actually, it's all good news. It's good news and good news. But if you're a glass half empty sort of person, maybe there's a little bit of bad news, but let's not focus on that here. The good news is for the first time in my adult life, now I've been married to my high school sweetheart for 22 years. I'd have to really do the math on that. But we got married in 2002. And for the first time in my adult life, I am now debt-free. We're both debt-free. We actually paid off our house this week. And I had mentioned about 2 or 3 months ago when Tuck became a full-time ministry, the single income, household income, that my disappointment was that we didn't have the house paid off. And our original goal, Sarah's and my plan, was to go another year and pay off our house and then have Tuck, enter the full-time ministry through the Unexpected Cosmology. And Yah was like, no, we're fast forwarding those plans. You're going to do it now. And we entered in January. And so what we initially did was we had these savings. And we're like, no, let's hold on to this because we're not really sure if the support is going to come through. And, maybe we're going to be kind of bleeding money month by month. And y'all really just put on our heart to be like, no, you know what? Take this step of faith, pay it off. So we took our entire bank account, we emptied our crypto, whatever we had, and we paid off the house. So now we are completely debt-free, car paid for, house paid for, everything paid for. But I guess the bad news, it's really good news, right? Good news and good news. But the bad news, if you want to think in that way, is that we are now, if the banks were to crash right now, we'd be like, yeah, okay, because we got nothing in it. So we are literally living paycheck to paycheck now, literally month to month. We are trusting that Yah is going to provide for us. So welcome, everybody. And it's going to be a great discussion tonight. I do want to just throw this out there since I am talking about it. This is this month's fundraiser, Help the Unexpected Cosmology reach our May 2024 goals. I just opened this up a couple months ago. I'm sorry, a couple days, 2 or 3 days ago. And already people are giving their donations. Thank you, everybody. And I would encourage everyone that the best way to go is through Patreon and become a monthly supporter there. And of course, you get the coupons every month and the return and that kind of stuff. But, obviously we're not at a point where we are able to survive off of Patreon. So for those of you that are going above and beyond, thank you so much, that are helping keep this ministry afloat. For those of you who have really, believe in what we're doing here and want to see us succeed. So thank you, everybody. Just, I bring this up week after week because, out of sight, out of mind. Hopefully this isn't, too much unpleasantry for you guys. Let's get into the study tonight. Oh, I do want to point this out again. I think I said this last week, but I have felt so encouraged by those who are supporting this ministry, who are sacrificing in order to keep this afloat, that this room here, the archives room, this used to be private for people who gave $5 a month or whatever to the ministry. But I have opened this up now to the public, and this room here is all my papers. I shouldn't say all. I think this week I put 20 new PDFs in here, and it takes time to actually go edit and put them in. But let me show you here, all these serpent seed papers, Ham's, Nimrod's children, Noah's vineyard and the tree of knowledge of good and evil connection, the lost plague of Egypt, erectile dysfunction. That's all new this week. Let's see. What else have I put in here? All these Mary Magdalene papers, it's all new. All these Mandela effect papers, this is all new as well. Like Moses has horns, mirror, mirror on the wall, C-3PO's silver leg, all that kind of stuff. It's all new. It's old work, but it's all new PDF files. So come in, check it out. Also, Sacred Scripture page. I think I showed this last week, but I have all these PDFs here. I'm sure there's plenty of books in here you've never read. It's for your education. Give it a read. And also one of those prizes I'm going to have for you tonight. I'm not ready to show it you. I'm not ready to hold on. I need another drink of coffee. As you can see, I'm really wired. Not wired enough, apparently. Coffee soothes me, actually. All right. So I'm not ready to show you yet the 613. I will in about 20 minutes or so. Let's get right into the study. We're on week 30, if I'm counting correctly, every single week. Leviticus 19 through chapter 20. And this week is called, in the modern Hebrew, Kedoshim, though we are, of course, going to be reading from the Paleo Hebrew. Last week review. We covered a lot of stuff last week. We covered well, medium rare, and rare steak. I showed you a whole picture of, super red versus super cooked steak. And the fact that there is no blood in meat. Well, why is this important? Because we read the passage where you are not to ingest any kind of blood, and people freak out, and they come into the Torah and they're like, okay, I gotta cook all of my meat till it's black all the way through, no pink, nothing. And guys, that's not blood. The blood is drained. That is the myoglobin. And I show that it's a protein found in the muscle cells of animals, which functions as an oxygen storage unit. And you can have really rare steak. You're not eating the blood. All right. The only meat that you're commanded to cook over a flame is the Passover lamb. Right. You got to cook that over a flame. Yeah, we went over the Azazel goal. I think I spent like an hour talking on Azazel. And just so you know, I'm also working on a formalizing a presentation. I'm working on a paper. Maybe in a week or two, I will give on YouTube on Azazel and showing all the extra biblical books and stuff. But we touched on him last week, and him being the scapegoat. I showed you the idea of ordinances and statutes. And judgments. Well, let me back up. We see that in last week's section, Yahuwah is telling them, okay, do not walk as the Egyptians walked, but now you're going into Canaan, and however bad it was in Egypt, it's going to be worse. Like Canaan is like the wild, wild west of the occult, and, just dark, satanic behavior. It's going to be bad. The things you see in there, just get rid of these people, get rid of this influence. I don't want any of this in your lives. This was interesting. We covered the idea of the Torah against unauthorized sacrifices. Yahuwah has okay, any sacrifices, you better be bringing that to the tabernacle. I don't want you sacrificing to those hairy goat demons. We kind of went over that as well. But then I also showed you examples in the Old Testament of building altars to Yahuwah, including Eliyahu, that'd be Elijah did. We see with Samuel and David and in Judges and so on and so forth. I think Gideon did. And so it's well, what does this mean? Because sometimes we read these passages in the Torah and it's we almost read it one way, and maybe it means something a little bit different. Maybe he was saying, you need to be bringing it to the tabernacle because I don't want you sacrificing to these other gods, which is different than saying you can't have any sacrifices anywhere else. All right, so I take you through my theory on judgments versus statutes and ordinances, because we see in the Torah, he'll say, obey my statutes and my ordinances and my judgments. And you're well, what does that mean? We usually just kind of lump this all together into the commands. They are all commands. Just like a rooster and a hen is a chicken, but a rooster is not a hen, right? Same idea. Or a bull and a cow are cattle, but a bull is not a cow, right? And so the idea that I put forward is that judgments might be understood to be logical or natural law, which mankind collectively understands without the need for divine commandment. So you can go all over the world and it's pretty well understood. Don't steal, don't murder. If you commit adultery, you're not going to do so well on the divorce settlement. Those kind of things. That seems to be pretty well understood in different governments around the world. And I would lump those into judgments, natural law. All right. But then if you're going to enter a covenant with a god, an Elohim, an Elohim, right? There are many different gods you can enter covenants in with. And each of these are going to have specific statutes or ordinances that are specific to that Elohim. In fact, that's what Yahweh says. He says, when you go into Canaan, I don't want you obeying the statutes and ordinances of those gods. I want you to obey my statutes and ordinances. So that tells us that there are some things within Canaanite culture that could be applied to judgments, but they had different statutes and ordinances. So a good example of this would be Sodom and Gomorrah. They were so wicked, they went beyond the judgment. I mean, they were doing things beyond natural law that, they were being judged for. So, and we could say the same thing about the West, how we are falling away to a point where there could be judgments on how disobedient we are to just natural law. All right. I asked a couple questions and I didn't get responses on it, surprisingly. I was kind of curious what people thought. I asked about eating clean and Sabbath. And I asked a question, are they judgments or statutes and ordinances? Because when I think of eating clean, for me, it is so obvious that unclean animals, like they're bottom feeders and things like that. Like you could see that makes sense in natural law of why we shouldn't be eating shrimp and lobster and catfish and pig and so on and so forth. That makes total sense. But does Yah judge other cultures who are not in a covenant with him for eating pig? No, I don't think he does. So what is it? Is it a statute, an ordinance, or a judgment? All right. Same thing with Sabbath. Sabbath was instituted on the seventh day of creation. Like Yah rested, the angels in heaven rest. And again, with the unclean animals, we see clean and unclean animals going onto the ark, right? We see 14 clean and a pair of unclean. So, the thing is with Sabbath, it's kind of interesting because I did a whole study on if you don't keep the Sabbath, that's taking the mark of the beast, versus if you do keep it, you are taking on the mark of Yah. And so you don't have the mark of the beast. Is it a statute or ordinance? All right. Or a judgment. All right. We looked at sexual sins directly related to being vomited out of the land. And I asked the question, would Adam and Chahwaha, or Eve, have remained had it not been for sexual sin? Were they cast out of paradise because they sinned, or was it specific to the sin of sexual sin? And this is what's so interesting about the serpent seed argument, because I took you through passages showing you that whenever they're cast out of the land, it's for adultery. And you say, well, spiritually, adultery is a little bit different than actual sex, but it's still tied into the picture of sex itself. There seems to be a connection with it. So that's kind of interesting. And of course, Yahushua Mashiach said that divorce is only allowed in the case of adultery. We looked at Asherah and the command not to have Asherah worship, Moloch worship, Baal worship. The idea that Asherah was believed to be Baal's mother. I don't need to go into all that again. And of course, don't pass your children, your seed through the flames to Moloch. All right, let's get started on tonight. Now, one of the things I was really thinking about was the idea of when they were actually going into Canaan. And this, I'm going to read you a little passage from Yahushua, or Joshua chapter 24, I guess this is. I thought it was a little earlier in the book. Maybe I put the wrong chapter verse. I don't really know, but let's go ahead and read this right here. And it talks about statutes and ordinances and covenant and all this kind of stuff. It's a really interesting passage considering what we're going to be reading this week and what we read last week. Now, therefore, fear Yahuwah and serve him in sincerity and truth. Cast aside the Elohim your father served beyond the Euphrates and in Egypt, and serve Yahuwah. So again, you're coming out of Egypt. You cast aside all those idols. You don't, he destroyed those Elohim with the 10 plagues, right? You're not going to worship those anymore, but now you're going into Canaan. And this is like, choose today whom you're going to serve. But if it is unpleasing in your sight to serve Yahuwah, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve. There's an open invitation. He's saying, look, if you don't want to serve me, fine. Go serve some other God. You don't have to be in a covenant with me. But if you're going to be in a covenant with me, you better take this serious. Whether the Allahayam your father served beyond the Euphrates, I'm talking about Babylon, or the Allahayam of the Amorites in whose land you are living. As for me and my house, we will serve Yahuwah. Famous passage. The people replied, far be it from us to forsake Yahuwah to serve other Allahayam. For Yahuwah, our Allahayam, brought us and our fathers out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, and performed these great signs before our eyes. He also protected us throughout our journey and among all the nations through which we traveled. And Yahuwah drove out before us all the nations, including the Amorites who lived in the land. We too will serve Yahuwah because he is our Allahayam. And of course, this generation, we see those who went, that one generation was a mighty and a great generation. And of course, their children and their grandchildren started to slip afterwards. But to their dying day, they kept to this oath collectively as a people. But Yahushua, of course, this would be Joshua, but Yahushua said to the people, you are not able to serve Yahuwah, for he is a holy Allahayam. This is going to be the theme of tonight, that Yahuwah is holy, and that we are not to mix the seeds together of cultures, of spirits, of fruits, of animals, everything. He is a jealous Allahayam. He will not forgive your rebellion or your sins. If you forsake Yahuwah and serve foreign Allahayam, he will turn and bring disaster on you and consume you even faster, even after he has been good to you. No, replied the people, we will serve Yahuwah. Then Yahushua told them, you are witness against yourselves that you have chosen to serve Yahuwah. We are witnesses, they said. Now, therefore, he said, get rid of the foreign Allahayam among you and incline your hearts to Yahuwah, the Allahayam of Yasharel. It's kind of interesting. Is he saying that there were still foreign idols or gods among them? It seems to be maybe the context there. It could be maybe just a cleansing out of their spirits, internalizing, getting rid of the idols from within. So the people said to Yahushua, we will serve Yahuwah or Allahayam and obey his voice. On that day, Yahushua made a covenant for the people. And there at Shechem, he established for them a statute and ordinance. So there it is right there, the statute and ordinance, which is unique to the Allahayam. Yahushua recorded these things in the book of the Torah of Allahayam. Then he took a large stone and set it up there under the oak that was near the sanctuary of Yahuwah. That comes from Yahushua. All right, so let's get into tonight's Torah portion. And again, the whole context here is about not blending. You're about to go into Canaan. Now, of course, we don't have the 12 spy incident yet. They were getting ready to go into Canaan. And if they had been obedient, we'll see this in Numbers, they would have gone straight in. They wouldn't have wandered for 38 more years. But that's for another week. They're getting ready to go into Canaan, and Yahuwah is telling them, okay, when you go in there, you're going to be true to me, and you're not going to mix with this culture. And Yahuwah, the ever-living, set words in order toward Al-Mashahah to declare, set forth words toward the congregation of the sons of Yasharel, and declare toward them, you shall exist as Kudashayam, or set-apart ones. You are to be holy, for I am Kudash, I am holy. I am Yahuwah, your Allahayah. A man shall reverently fear his mother and his father. And you shall guard my Sabbaths. I am Yahuwah, your Allahayah. Now, if you look for it, because I don't have commentary tonight on the Ruach HaKodesh, she is here throughout these couple of chapters. So pay attention to this, because when he's talking about obey your father and your mother, he's referring to himself and the Ruach. And we'll see, if you don't even have to look that much through the lines, between the lines to see it. You shall not turn yourself toward the Allahayam, and shall not fashion to yourselves Allahayah cast from metal. I am Yahuwah, your Allahayah. And if your slaughter be a sacrifice of shalom, delightfully, with pleasure shall you sacrifice him. On the day you slaughter it, he shall be eaten, and the day after. But if the remainder continue until the third day, he shall burn it. What do you guys think about that? I don't have further commentary on this. There was so much, guys. There was I was telling the group before I started that it was so overwhelming this week. There's not a lot to read, but every line in here is so detailed. I could do a study on like every passage. I mean, there's so much in here. And I just couldn't cover it all this week. But what do you guys think about this idea that you're to eat the meat, but if there's a remainder on the third day, it shall be burned? Just think about that, because today we have refrigeration systems and things like that. But are we to, and the problem is by the time the meat shows up at the grocery store, right? How long has the animal been dead? Something to think about our own lives and how we consume things. And conditionally, if any be eaten on the third day, it is an abomination. He shall not be graciously accepted. And he that eats it shall carry his perversity, guilt, or penalty of sin, because he has profaned the Kudash Yahuwah, the ever-living. And that nefesh shall be cut off from the midst of his people. And I'm just asking you guys to evaluate this. I'm not making any statements here. I could already see people being angry at me, particularly some of the meat eaters out there, for even suggesting that maybe this applies to us. And upon your harvest, the harvest of your land, you shall not completely reap the corners of your field, neither shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest. And your vineyard you shall not glean, the scattered grapes you shall not gather. You shall leave them for the wretched, the poor, the meek, or afflicted, and for the stranger. I am Yahuwah, your Allahayah. I'll have more to say on that in a moment. You shall not steal stealthily, and you shall not deceive through flattery or denials in any man unto his fellow. And you shall not swear, binding by an oath, in my name deceitfully, and you shall not profane the name of your Allahayah. I am Yahuwah, the ever-living. You shall not defraud, oppress, or act violently toward your companion. Now, it's interesting here, Pamela puts companion, and you see the King James right over here on the left, and they always put neighbor. So wherever she puts companion, they put neighbor. And you shall not despoil. The wages of your hireling shall not tarry with you until daybreak. You shall not diminish or little esteem, curse or condemn the deaf. And to the face of the blind you shall not place incitements to go astray, or anything which one might stumble, but shall reverently fear your Allahayah. I am Yahuwah, the ever-living. You shall not fashion wickedness, depravity, or iniquity in judgment. You shall not lift up the face of the weak. He who is hanging by a thread not shall rashly favor the face of the Gada wall. Let me just look at this word real quick. A mighty one. So a person with a lot of influence, money, a king, a ruler, or anything like that, a mayor, a councilman, a politician. You're not to, favor him over the poor. And of course, Yaakov talks about this in the Epistle of James, not to tell the poor man to sit over here and, go put the rich man up in the place of honor. Upright, honest, justly shall you judge your neighbor. You shall not walk about as a slanderer among your people. This is like the sin of the internet right there. Slandering among the people. Man. You shall not arise against the blood of your companion. I am Yahuwah. You shall not hate your brother in your heart. You shall clearly correct your neighbor, and shall not carry sin over him. You shall not seek revenge, and shall not guard anger against the sons of your people, but you shall have love for your companions, such as you have for yourself. And I think that last line is really important, because I was thinking this week about how difficult this is, that on one hand, it says, you shall clearly correct your neighbor, right? Like when your neighbor is unjust, when they're wrong, you are to correct them. But then you're not to hold the sin over them either. That's the hard part, right? Because on one hand, you could turn a blind eye and be like, oh, I'm so tolerant, I'm so loving. You turn a blind eye to injustice. But then when you focus on that injustice and you say, this is wrong, and I'm going to point this out, we need to fix this situation, then you're not to hold the sin over them either. No, there has to be consequence and so on and so forth. But I think that last line here is key. You shall have love for your companions such as you have for yourself, right? So how do you want to be treated? How do you want to be corrected? How do you want to be, brought, restored and forgiven, right? And that's how we want to treat other people, to be brought back into the circle again of trust. You shall guard my statutes. You shall not allow your cattle to lie down with diverse kinds. Your field you shall not sow with diverse kinds. Any garment of diverse kinds, such as linen and wool together, shall not ascend upon you. I'm going to skip right over that because I'll be covering that later. And if a man lies down pouring out seed with a woman that is shapakath, let me just look at that, a maidservant, usually a foreigner who is part of the family, betrothed to a man, and who has not been redeemed by kinsman or redeemer, or rather liberty has not been given to her, she shall not exist punished. She shall not be executed, for she was not free. And he shall bring his guilt offering to Yahweh the ever-living toward the entrance of the tent of meeting, a ram as a guilt offering. And the priest shall make a covering atonement over him with the ram of the guilt offering. It's basically, it's giving of the woman protection there. But people are going to read that and go, oh, she's not free. What? It's like, no. He just got the woman off the hook. Like the guy went and slept with her. She's not going to be killed or off now because, of what happened. And the priest shall make a covering atonement over him with the ram of the guilt offering into the face of Yahweh the ever-living over his sin which he has sinned. And pardon shall be for him from the sin which he has sinned. And if you shall come toward ha'aratz, and you shall have planted upright all trees for food, and it's talking about the earth here, then you shall regard as uncircumcised the fruit. 3 years shall he exist to you as uncircumcised. It shall not eat him. And in the 4th year, all the fruit shall exist, kudash, a public thanksgiving. And in the 5th year, you shall eat his fruits, that it may increase to you his produce. I am Yahweh the ever-living. You shall not consume over the blood. You shall not practice enchantment, augur, or whisper sorcery. Not use hidden arts. You shall not strike off, join together, cause to go in a circle, a region of your head, and shall not destroy or ruin a region of your beard. And an incision for the nephash you shall not place upon your flesh. And of course, the nephash meaning a soul. And shall not place upon you writing, a mark branded on the skin, talking about tattoos. I am Yahuwah the ever-living. And I'll have more to say on this. You shall not wound or profane your daughter to commit prostitution. Seems like good advice. Don't sell your daughter into prostitution. Or to commit prostitution, fornication, for then the land shall commit fornication, prostitution, idolatry, and ha'aratz, the earth shall be filled with wicked deeds. Keep your daughters pure. Good advice. You shall guard my Sabbaths and my kudasha, my set apart place. You shall reverently fear. I am Yahuwah the ever-living. You shall not turn toward Al-Abath. Let me just look at this here. Al-Abath would be a soothsayer, a man or woman having a python in them. I thought this was a really interesting description, Pamela. A soothsayer, a man or woman having a python in them. Almost think of like the serpent in the garden. And I remember Michael Eisner talked about how the idea of the serpent in Babylonian kind of Mesopotamian terms was talking about some soothsaying going on. That is to say, they are an empty vessel by which a soothsaying spirit speaks, much like a ventriloquist uses a puppet. All right. You shall not turn toward a soothsayer and toward al-ha-yada nuyam. Now I got to look at this real quick. That would be a prophet or a wizard, or one having the spirit of Python. And toward him who seeking after chooses to be polluted by them. I am Yahuwah your Allahayah. So it means the company of those who keep them too. You will be polluted with them, right? You got to choose your company, your friends wisely. From before the face of a hoary hair. And I think last week we talked about the hoary goat. So now a hoary hair, meaning an old person. You shall rise up and shall honor the face of the bearded ones, and he shall inspire reverence from your Allahayah. I am Yahuwah the ever-living. Since I'm not going to comment on this later, I think that's just a sad part of our culture today, there where people do not stand up for the elderly. And, the idea is like, you see an old person, like they're coming onto a bus or whatever, and you stand up and give them your seat, right? And it just rarely happens anymore. In the book of Job, he talks about this, about how, he was elderly when that story took place, as it was. And he said that, the young men will stand for him. And if a stranger turns aside from the way, tarrying to sojourn with you in your land, you shall not act violently, defraud, or oppress him. Like the native born, so shall be the stranger who turns aside from the way, tarrying to exist unto you. And you shall not love for him like for yourself. For you existed as strangers in the land of Mitzrayim. I am Yahuwah, the ever-living. You hear that a lot tonight. I am Yahuwah. He keeps saying that over and over again. You shall not fashion iniquity or unrighteousness in judgment, in measuring length or weight or measurement of liquid. Sadak, that which is right and just, in scales and balance stones, a just and right yafa. And let me just look at that word real quick. A dry measure. A just and right hayon shall exist to you. I am Yahuwah your Alahayah, who caused you to go forth from the land of Mitzrayim, and you shall guard all my statutes and all my judgments and fashion them. I am Yahuwah the ever-living. Chapter 20. And Yahuwah the ever-living set words in order toward Al-Mashahah to declare, and towards the sons of Yasharel you shall set words in order. Any man from the sons of Yasharel or from the strangers that sojourns in Yasharel, which gives of his seed unto Malak, we saw that last week, dying, he shall be executed. Executed. I mean, he's saying like you guys go in this land, you're gonna see it. You're gonna hear the cries. You're gonna see the flames at night. There's gonna be they're gonna be blowing the trumpets off in the woods, off in the valleys. They're gonna be giving their sons over to Malak, passing their seed over. You'd better not be doing this. I do not want to catch any of you doing that. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. Obviously, this didn't go away because we see hundreds of years later, Yasharel still dealing with this, and the kings of Judah. And I will set my face against the man and will destroy him as a sign from the midst of his people. For he gave from his seed unto Malak for the intention of polluting my Makudash and to profane my set apart name. Of course, last week we saw with the 5 Satans that one of them seems to be, he introduced the killing of the child within the womb, and seems to be running Planned Parenthood today. And conditionally, if the people of the land in any way hide their eyes from even one man, he and his giving from his seed into Malak and does not execute him, then even I will set in place my face against the man, against him, and against his family, and shall cut down him and that commit fornication, idolatry after him to commit fornication, prostitution, idolatry after Malak from among their people. So he's like, you better not be even turning a blind eye. This is so bad. Like, don't even turn a blind eye. If you see people in your community doing this, you need to report this. We need to take care of this. We need to remove them from the land, or else it's going to pollute all the land. Like, you need to understand this. It's not just that person making that decision. It's going to pollute everything. It's going to pollute the land. And this is to all be holy. And you're going to be dragging if you care for me, if you love me, you're going to be dragging my name through the mud if you allow this to take place. And then the Nefash, which turns toward Al-Ha-Abath and Al-Ha-Yada Nuyam to prostitute themselves after them, I will set in place my face against that Nefash and will cut down him from the midst of his people. And of course, these are talking about soothsayers and wizards. And she will purify you. Who's the she here? Okay, because we just talked about other Allahayam that, you're going to be cut off if you serve these other Allahayam, but then who is she? And she will purify you, consecrate you, and you will exist. Kudashayam, for I am Yahuwah, your Allahayah, and you will guard my statutes and shall fashion them. I am Yahuwah who does consecrate you. And of course, I was talking to Pamela today, and she believes that the she here is, of course, the Ruach HaKodesh. And this is what's so important about when he started out this chapter: obey your father and your mother, right? Don't just obey me, your father, obey your mother as well. For any man who diminishes, despises, or curses his father and his mother, there it is again. We just saw the she, that she will purify you, or you'll be cut off. For any man who diminishes, despises, or curses his father and his mother, dying he shall die. What is that a reference to? We've seen dying he shall die. That was at the tree of knowledge of good and evil, that they would die spiritually, and then they would begin to die. And of course, Adam died some 900 or so years later. He didn't die on that day physically, but spiritually he did die. So it's the same thing. You disobey your father and mother, dying you shall die. He has diminished, lightly esteemed, or cursed his father, or alternatively his mother. His blood shall be upon him. It's so interesting, right? Because we're talking, this whole context here is we're talking about gods. We're not talking about necessarily the physicality so much. And the man who commits adultery with another man's covenant woman, one that commits adultery with his companion's covenant woman, dying, he shall be executed. Notice it doesn't say dying, he shall die. It's dying, he shall be executed. Both adulterer and adulteress. And the man that lies down with his father's covenant woman, he has revealed his father's nakedness. Dying, he shall be executed. Both of them. Their blood is upon them. Now, why is it talking about this? Because I just said we're talking about gods. Well, I believe that all these ceremonies, they would take place while they were worshiping Moloch or Asherah or Baal. And, as I mentioned last week, it's part of the sex magic, part of the ceremony, the suggestion that if you were to go and do these acts with different people, that you are then bringing Asherah, the mother of Baal, together, and the mother and the son would procreate and therefore bring the good weather. And they were shepherds, right? The Israelites were shepherds coming into this farming agricultural community, and so they would go in and see these horrific acts of, like what we saw in Jasher, with this women would be passed around, and like no questions asked, right? You could be sleeping with your mother, your sister, whoever. You just go into wherever, some teepee or whatever they did, maybe out in the open, I don't know, and all part of the ceremony. Dying, he shall be executed, both of them. Their blood is upon them. And a man that lies down with his son's kalaha, dying, he shall die. Let me just look at kalaha real quick so you guys have the context. This is usually translated as daughter-in-law. Dying, he shall die, both of them. They have fashioned pollution. Their blood is upon them. And a man that lies down with a male as he lies down with a woman, the two of them have worked an abomination. Dying, he shall die. Their blood is upon them. And a man who takes for himself a woman and her mother. So you could alternatively, you could flip this. You could say, you could take a woman and her daughter. It is a wicked deed. He shall be burned in fire. I don't think in most cases people take a woman and their mother. Usually it's the worst abuse that happens in homes is when the non-biological father, a boyfriend, comes to live in the house, and you hear of these incidents with the children getting abused. So it'd be like, he who takes himself a woman and her daughter, it works the same way. It is a wicked deed. He shall be burned in fire, he and them. Such wicked deeds will not exist among you. And a man that gives his copulation with a beast. So we're talking about bestiality. I think, dying, he shall die, and the beast you shall destroy. I'll be talking more about these very unpleasant thoughts later tonight. And a woman who draws near any beast to lie with it, you shall kill the woman and the beast. Dying, they shall die. Their blood is upon them. And a man that takes for himself his sister, whether his father's daughter or perhaps his mother's daughter, and observes her nakedness, and she shall observe his nakedness, it is a reproach. And they shall be cut off in the eyes of the sons of their people. Now notice that she has to return the favor too, for both of them to be cut off. Otherwise, just he alone would be cut off. another incident would be like the book of Susanna, which is I love that book, magnificent book. The woman was innocent, and these two pervs, go in there and they're observing her nakedness. They're the ones that are dealt with, and they tried to frame her, but she was proven to be innocent, so she was off the hook. It would be the same thing with Bathsheba, right? She didn't do anything wrong in bathing. David was the perv in that incident. And they shall be cut off in the eyes of the sons of their people. He has revealed his sister's nakedness. He shall carry his guilt acquired by sinning. And a man that lies down with a woman who is unwell, languishing, wretched in her menstruation, and having revealed her nakedness, he has uncovered her fountain of blood, and she has revealed the fountain of blood, and both of them shall be cut off from the midst of their people. And the nakedness of your mother's sister or your father's sister you shall not uncover, for he has made naked his blood relation. They shall carry their guilt. And a man that lies down with his uncle's beloved, he has uncovered his uncle's nakedness. They shall carry their penalty of sin. They shall die void of offspring. And a man that takes for himself his brother's covenant woman, it is impurity and abomination. He has uncovered his brother's nakedness. He shall exist bereft of offspring. And you shall guard all my statutes and all my judgments, and shall fashion them, that she does not vomit you out. This is talking about the land itself, right? And remember here, the context is sexuality. It seems that the sex itself, the adultery, is what causes them to be vomited out. We later see this when Israel becomes a whore, and then Judah becomes a whore. The land where I will bring you to settle down to dwell in her. And you shall not walk in the customs of the Gahu. Yeah, let me just look at that again. I study all through these, and then I forget some of these words. Wait, this is 14, right? Oh, it doesn't say. Oh. Or it's right there, the people. Okay, so I guess that's like the goyim, right? And you shall not walk in the customs of the other nations, the other people, which I send away from your faces. For all these they fashion, and I am wearied with them. And I declare unto you, you will inherit their ground, and I will give it to you to take possession of her, a land flowing with chalab, that would be milk, and honey. I, Yahuwah, your Allahayah, which separates you out from the peoples. You shall therefore distinguish between clean beast and between unclean beast, and between unclean winged fowl and between clean winged fowl. And you shall not make loathsome your nathashath by beast or by winged fowl or by any which creeps on the ground, which I have shut out from you for being unclean. And isn't it interesting, when we went over the clean and unclean passages, I showed you in the Epistle of Barnabas, where he says, and I'll be quoting again from it tonight, where he says that the problem is that people only translated that to be physical food, which he agreed with. He said, yes, you don't eat unclean food. But he said they didn't get that it was talking about people, right? So we just went through this whole section about obey your father and mother, meaning your Allahayam. Okay, don't obey these other Allahayam. And then don't commit all these perverse sex acts. And then it's interesting that it's talking about the clean and unclean beast. But it's interesting that it just brought that into the conversation when we're talking about people and how they worship other gods through sexuality. Really interesting how it all ties in together. And you shall not make loathsome your nathashath or your souls by beast or by winged fowl or by any which creeps on the ground, which I have shut out from you for being unclean. And you shall exist unto me, Kudashayam, for I am Kudash, holy, set apart, Yahuwah, the ever-living, and have distinguished you from out of the peoples, that you may exist unto me. And a man or perhaps a woman, if he exists in them, a ahwab or perhaps a yada anuya, and that's there's again, that word throws me off, a prophet or a wizard. So if there exists a prophet or a wizard having the spirit of Python, dying, he shall die. Again, that's the same language as we saw the tree of knowledge of good and evil with the serpent, because the serpent was like the spirit of the python there, right? They shall cast stones, piling them up. Their blood shall be upon them. All right. So that concludes the Torah reading tonight. I think that deserves a drink of coffee. How about you? What do you think? All right. So if you could sum up tonight it's a call to holiness. We see this in Leviticus, QURA 19:1. Of course, this week's Torah portion, as I mentioned, is Kedoshim, and it means holy ones. You are to be holy. We are to be a holy people for who is holy. And Yahuwah, the ever-living, set words in order toward Al-Mashahad to declare, set forth words toward the congregation of the sons of Yasharel, and declare to them, you shall exist as holy ones. There's the Torah portion named tonight, set apart ones. For why? For I am Kudash. I am holy. And I'm pointing at myself. I'm not, it's Yahuwah who is holy. I am Yahuwah, your Allahaya. And again, we see in chapter 20, that was 19, verse 1 and 2, but then we read chapter 20, says the same thing. And she will purify you, and that's, of course, what I believe is the Ruach HaKodesh, consecrate you, and you will exist Kudashayam, holy ones. For I am Yahuwah, your Allahaya, and you will guard my statutes and shall fashion them. I am Yahuwah, who does consecrate you. Here's another one we saw in chapter 11 of Leviticus. For I, Yahuwah, the ever-living, have lifted you up from the land of Mitzrayim to exist unto you of Allahayam, and you shall exist as Kudash ones, holy ones, set apart. For I am firmly established as Kuda Yuash. All right. So let me read from 1 Peter here and then stop the comment on this. This is what Kepha says. Therefore, prepare your minds for action. That is a perfect line for what we're dealing with tonight, right? They're going into Canaan. Prepare your minds. Prepare to be holy. Start now. Start this day to be holy, but you better, continue to go in there. Be sober-minded. Set your hope fully on the grace to be given you at the revelation of Yahushua HaMashiach. As obedient children, this is like perfectly lifted out of Leviticus 19:20. Do not conform to the passions of your former ignorance. Now, I talked about the idea of former ignorance being your unconscious sins. And now that they are conscious sins, now that the unconsciousness has become your conscious, don't return to those passions anymore. You've been forgiven for those, but now you're not to continue in them. I'll give you an example. How many here, let's have a mature conversation. How many here knew in the past that having intercourse with a woman during her menstruation was an abomination? Right now, maybe a lot of women have, maybe there's couples that still are, working with birth control and that kind of stuff. That's a whole different conversation. Of course, my wife and I have gotten to the point years ago where we were like, no, we're not going to do that anymore, But how many knew that was an abomination? Well, if you were that was your former ignorance. Now that when a woman is in her time of month, don't undress her, don't touch her in that way. Like, do not expose her nakedness. That is an abomination to Yahuwah. And we know that now. So let's not continue sinning in that way. But just as he who called you is holy, so be holy in all you do. For it is written, be holy because I am holy. He's quoting here from Leviticus chapter 19, or really probably a few different passages in Leviticus. And this is the thing that I really want to focus on tonight, because I was raised in Christianity. Talk about former ignorance. This idea that you cannot be holy. You can't do holy things, because if you try to do anything, if you try to do any kind of work-based thing, then you're actually sinning, because now it's like some sort of idolatry. It just gets it's very jacked. I mean, it's like you're only holy because Yahushua HaMashiach, or you say Jesus Christ is holy. And it's like, no, I'm not holy because I believe he's holy. That doesn't make me holy. He says right here, be holy because he is holy. It's my knowledge that Yahushua HaMashiach, or Yahuwah, is holy, that now I need to be holy. I need to do as he does. Or if I don't, then I'm dragging his name through the mud. I just can't sit here and go, oh, well, like there's nothing I can do. I'm just going to continue my sins. But I just, put my faith in you. This is Christianity 101. I put my faith in a belief in your holiness, but there's nothing I can do about it. And that's just whack. That whole thing is whack. It's like, no. We are all called to do not conform to the passions of your former ignorance. Be holy. Hebrews 12 says this: pursue peace with everyone as well as holiness, without which no one will see Yahuwah. Wait, what? Pursue peace with everyone as well as holiness, without which no one will see Yahuwah. Now, Christianity would say, oh, yeah. Well, as long as you believe in the holiness of Yahushua, Jesus Christ, you're good to go. It's like, well, man, some people are going to be really surprised. That's actually not what it says. See to it that no one falls short of the grace of Allah Hayam. So this is where scripture is going to be twisted. A lot of people are going to say, well, the grace is, you have the grace to sin type of thing, right? And actually, no, if you fall from grace, it means you have sinned. You have transgressed. You are in the grace of Allah Hayam if you're being holy and not transgressing the Torah. This is why it is so important to see to it that no one falls short of the grace. And I can see people twisting this to say, well, no, if actually someone is being works-based, they're actually working for their holiness. That's what we need to make sure. Now they're falling from grace. You see how they'll twist and turn this? You guys have all been a part of these conversations in your churches and families, I'm sure. And that no root of bitterness springs up to cause trouble and defile many. See to it that no one is sexually immoral. Of course, if you're sexually immoral, you are not under the grace of Allah Hayam. Or is godless like Esau, who for a single meal sold his birthright. Of course, this is Hebrews chapter 12. There's another one from Romans chapter 6. Usually I like to save Paul for the end. Some of my anti-Paul fans out there are not going to be pleased with this, but these are beautiful passages. This is beautiful. Listen to this. But now that you have been set free from sin and have become slaves of Allah Hayam, right? So a lot of people, they translate Paul, whenever he talks about liberty, they say, oh, you have the liberty to sin. No, he just said you've been set free from sin. Okay, so now if you're walking in liberty, it means you're not sinning. The Torah is liberty. Walking out the Torah is liberty, because living in sin is being shackled to death itself. Dying, you shall die, right? You can only be a slave to sin or to Allah Hayam, one of the two. You can't choose not to be a slave. All right, so you're set free from sin, now you're a slave to Allah Hayam. The benefit you reap leads to holiness, and the result is eternal life. So you see that the flow of thought there from A, B, C to D. You're set free from sin. You're not sinning anymore. You're a slave to Allah Hayam, which means that you are now living holy because he's holy. A slave does what his master says. He does the task of his master. He represents his master. And that itself leads to eternal life. Romans 6:19 says this. I guess this is it's a repeat. I put this in reverse order. I should have maybe put this, whatever. I'm using an example from everyday life because of your human limitations. Just as you used to offer yourselves as slaves to impurity and to ever-increasing wickedness, so now offer yourselves as slaves to righteousness leading to holiness. All right. 2 Corinthians 7:1 says this. Therefore, since we have these promises, dear friends, let us purify ourselves from everything that contaminates body and spirit, perfecting holiness out of reverence for Allah Hayam. So again, if I'm reading Paul right, he's saying that in order to be holy, we have to purify ourselves from everything that contaminates the body. That's an action right there. And our spirit, not just physically, but internally as well. Ephesians 4:20-24 says this. But this is not the way you came to know Mashiach. Surely you heard of him and were taught in him, in keeping with the truth that is in Yahusha, to put off your former way of life, your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be renewed in the Ruach, the spirit of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like Allahayam in true righteousness and holiness. That is an actual, he's saying it's like taking off your old clothing, your coat, your shirt, your underwear, your pants, taking it off and putting on new clean clothing. It's a complete like 180 reversal from your old life. Exodus 19:5-6 says this: now, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you will be my treasured possession out of all nations, for the whole earth is mine. You guys know this is a favorite passage of mine. And unto me you shall be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So I want to look at another passage really quickly back in Kepha again, 1 Peter, where he talks about the kingdom of priests and holy nation. He's quoting Exodus, and he says, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for Allahayam's own possession. Isn't that interesting? He's literally quoting the Old Testament right here. He didn't get the memo. Like, he didn't get the memo that we're not to do, obey the Old Testament anymore. To proclaim the virtues of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of Allahayam. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. All right. Shemawath, or Exodus 25:8-9 says, and they are to make a sanctuary for me, so that I may dwell among them. You must make the tabernacle and design all its furnishings according to the pattern I show you. So I just want to put here, the root word for sanctuary is kadash, which is this week's passage, which means to be holy, right? So here we see another connection between the actual tabernacle in the wilderness and our own bodies, right? How we clothe ourselves, our spirit, right? We are to be a temple. We are to be holy. We are to treat our bodies and our souls and our spirits as set apart and holy, as if we were to actually walk into the actual tabernacle. I don't know if you guys experience this when you're maybe going into cathedrals and stuff. As I've been, researching the mud flood, Millennial Kingdom, I'll go into these really old cathedrals here in America, but of course in Europe as well. And you walk in there and it's like really quiet, and you kind of you walk differently. Like, you have these different steps because you want to respect the space, right? And you're like, this is a sacred space. Like, if only we treated ourselves, our own bodies, that way all the time, just as we would walking into a tabernacle. Like, imagine if you were walking into the tabernacle in the wilderness. Now, the name of Yahuwah, I pointed out that this is brought up a lot. And he says, for I am Kudash, I am Yahuwah, I am Yahuwah, your Allahayah. Now, the phrase, just in chapter 19, I wish I counted up chapter 20. The phrase, I am Yahuwah, is used 16 times in chapter 19 alone. Like, you start to get the feeling like he's trying to make a point here, right? It's if he knows, like, repetition works, because if he just said it once, be like, yeah, okay, yeah. But like 16 times, we should start going, I think we need to start taking this seriously. The holiness of Yahuwah means being set apart rather than mixing. All right. And that's, again, the whole theme here. For the rest of the night, for the rest of the next hour, we're going to be talking about things not to mix with. And what I want to do with a lot of it is take it more, below the surface. I don't want to just be this exoteric thing about, make sure the orange tree and the apple tree are, so many feet apart, right? We want to start going, okay, how does this work out in our own personal lives? Now, I want to really talk quickly about the heart of Nimrod, and which is completely opposite to the name of Yahuwah. So we see it here in Genesis chapter 11. Now the whole world had one language and a common form of speech, and as people journeyed eastward, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. Now the context here is that the division of the land is happening, and they're all to kind of go off in their different ways and establish their lands, their kingdoms, and that kind of stuff. Of course, some of them say, come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. So they use bricks instead of stone and tar instead of mortar. And come, they said, let us build for ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, that we may make a name for ourselves. and not be scattered over the face of all the earth. So any kind of, we want to make sure about that in our own lives, in our ministries, any movement we're a part of. We don't want it, if we find ourselves in a predicament where we are trying to make a name for ourselves, we now have the heart of Nimrod. We are not living, just those 16 mentions in chapter 19 of Leviticus, I am Yahweh, right? We are not living for Yahweh, we're living for ourselves. We see here in verse 8 and 9, so Yahweh scattered them from there over the face of all the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it's called Babel, for there Yahweh confused the language of the whole world. And from that place, Yahweh scattered them over the face of all the earth. Now, we're going to go into passages about how he's not the author of confusion. So you might look at this and go, well, wait a second, I think he just confused people. But these were people, obviously, that were not living for him. They were living for themselves, right? So if we are living for Yahuwah, then it is true he is not the author of confusion. If there is confusion, then there is some crossing of the wires going on there. We see in James or Yaakov chapter 3, it says, who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good conduct, good works, good fruit, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter jealousy and selfish ambition, now the spirit of jealousy is the same thing that Joseph's brothers had. If you read the 12 patriarchs, they talk about the spirit of jealousy that came over them, and the actual spirit that caused them to want to murder their brother. They want to dethrone him. They want to throw him in a pit. They want to sell him to slavery. They want to get rid of him. They lied to their father about it. This spirit of jealousy overcame them, and we see the same thing in the comment sections online. The spirit of jealousy that goes around, where people gossip and the slander. They want to dethrone somebody. They want to say terrible things about someone, and they can't see, in their mind, they can't see how Yah could actually be working through this ministry because of maybe one or two things they said that they disagree with. We need to dethrone this person, get rid of him. This is the bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in their hearts. It says, do not boast in it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come from above. So we're dealing with two mothers here, two types of wisdom, an earthly wisdom and a heavenly wisdom. But is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. This is that the spirit of jealousy. It's demonic. This is we talk about like all the satanic stuff out there. No, this is demonic. This is satanic. All this slander and gossip and all that kind of stuff. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder, confusion. It's the same word as confusion, disorder. This was the spirit of Nimrod, the selfish ambition, and every evil practice. Yaakov chapter 3. And then we see this here in 1 Corinthians. And now turning to Paul again. If anyone speaks in a tongue, two or at most three should speak in turn. Oh boy, I'm dealing with the tongues chapter, aren't I? And someone must interpret. But if there is no interpreter, he should remain silent in the church and speak only to himself and Allah Hayam. 2 or 3 prophets should speak, and the others should weigh carefully what is said. And that's interesting there, that the prophet. I'd like to do a whole study on prophecy one week. What Scripture actually defines as prophecy. And if a revelation comes to someone who is seated, the first speaker should stop. For you can all prophesy in turn so that everyone may be instructed and encouraged. The spirits of prophets are subject to prophets. For Allahayam is not an Allahayam of disorder, or there is confusion, but of peace, as in all the churches of the saints. And of course, I put in here the word glossa or glossalia means language. I personally believe here he is talking about different languages and not some googly gack, whatever you want to call it, language, apparently, language of angels or whatever. And I would point out here, I will quote John MacArthur this one time. I know some of you are like, oh, not John MacArthur. But he has a good point in this. He says that if the, because, he doesn't believe in the charismatic interpretation of glossalia as well, or glossa. He believes in just human languages. But he says that even still, if you were to go with this, just speaking, the tongue babbling, all right? He said that if if the charismatic movement were actually to obey this command here of speaking one in turn and just taking turns, and you had to just sit there and listen to somebody babbling up there that you didn't know what they were talking about, except for maybe an interpreter coming up saying, okay, this is what he's saying. He said the whole movement would die away. It would all go away. And I actually agree with that. There would, yes, are there people today who privately go into the prayer closet and speak in tongues? Yes. But what I'm saying is that if the charismatic movement as a whole, I guess I'm putting my theory forward. If the charismatic movement as a whole were to go by this and not invite everyone to start speaking at the same time, and you go through this process, it would die away. I'm sorry if that upsets some people, but now this is something I just want to throw out there at you guys. This might be a little bit of distraction tonight, but what we see here is a bunch of shields of different countries. And this is in the Dark Ages, the medieval era, or as I like to call the Millennial Kingdom. And I find it really interesting how, raise of hands, how many people here have traveled through Europe? It's very different than traveling through America. Now, I live in South Carolina. If I wanted to, I could get up at 4 or 5 in the morning. I could be up in Maine, New Hampshire, somewhere like that by 11, 12 o'clock at night, right? I could drive up through I haven't counted, 15 states? I don't know. I'm going through Virginia, North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, right? Going through all these states. Maybe I make a pit stop in Rhode Island. But you're going to see some differences, obviously, but it's not like this. When you go through Europe, you're going through, you go 100 miles in any direction. You're going completely different languages, completely different cultures. The cities look different. Now, there's some uniform things, and those are the cathedrals. That's the amazing thing, how there's just uniformity in all the cathedrals. They all look the same. There was this master architect that came in, but it's completely different than the spirit of Nimrod. I think there's something to be said about the fact that, yes, there was a universal language. It was, believe it or not, it was Latin. But all these different cultures, I almost think that for me, that I was putting so much thought into this about the millennial kingdom and how Yahushua HaMashiach did not create this world where it was like this Nimrodic kingdom where they all had this one voice and they all, they're all separate. I find that really, really interesting. All right. So you could say it's not about, making a name for yourself, right? It's about making a name for the Most High, or your Allahayam, Yahweh, Yahushua HaMashiach. All right. Now, this is the part here where I want to show you the surprise. And I'm so happy my wife did this. This is the first contribution that my wife, Sarah, has done for the Unexpected Cosmology, at least the website. She's done many contributions behind the scenes, but she actually designed this from scratch. This right here is the 613. You can go to my website, and underneath archives and resource material, it's right there, the 613. This is for everybody, whether you're a subscriber or not. And what we wanted to do was, this is kind of huge, and we want to shrink this down a little bit because this is a big screen here, and the whole thing spreads out. But we wanted to show the 613 in the 10 and the 2, right? So you take the 10 commandments, and what Christianity says, we just have to keep the 10 commandments, excusing away the 4th commandment, right? We don't keep the 4th commandment, so there's only 9 they keep. But we keep the 10 commandments, but the 613 you don't have to keep. And it's like, well, wait a second. And they also point out when Yahushua said, the 2 greatest commands, right? Love Allahayam and love your neighbor, which is actually what we dealt with in the Torah portion tonight. But what this does is you see right there in the middle, 10 commandments, it spreads the 5 and the 5, right? Love others, love Elohim. And then we see all the different commands here. So I want to, I'm trying to think of a good one I want to show you guys here. I think, let me start with no graven images. So we'll go over here, and I'm going to pop this on. We're going to go click on no other. Okay. So then this pops up, and you could see of the 613 commands, all the ones in here that describe no graven images. And so that's the thing. If we're love Allah Hayam and love others, Yahuwah gave us these 613 commands in the Torah to say, okay, well, this is how you do it. This is how you have no graven images. So let's pick a random one out here. Let's look at number 256. Oh, look, what do you know? It was Leviticus 19:31. We read this tonight. Do not seek after mediums. That seems like good advice. Now, what's great about this is that you can pick any, all these different translations here. I'm going with the King James Version. So let's read it right here. You just click on this and you can read it. You can read in whatever translation you want. Do not turn to, oh, well, that just went to, I just clicked on it, went to the page, but do not turn to mediums or necromancers. So we read tonight, Leviticus 19:31. Let's pick another one here, 252. This comes from Exodus. Let me find one. Oh, Leviticus 19:4. Do not take on the character of the gods, the false gods. And so we could click on that, and it says, do not turn to idols or make for yourselves any gods of cast metal. I am Yahuwah, your Elohim. Now, of course, this is all in the language. This would say, I am the Lord your God. And we designed this. The desire here is that this is for people who are new to the Torah, who maybe don't understand how it all works, and they can come here and they can kind of play around and look at it and learn about it. This is a tool for rookies and for people who are veterans in the Torah to come here. I also have on here the 613 PDF, and this is actually, it actually lists, I put this up this week, each of the different commands, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way up to 10, no other Elohim. And then you could see here all the different commands, like 1, you see 11, 13, 14, 16, 17, 172, 185, 186, all the different commands for how you have no other gods before him. And then we get no graven images. We see command number 94, 95, 251, 252, so on and so forth, right? And these all give references to where you can find them. So this is a study tool for everybody out there. Hope you guys enjoy this. Let's keep talking about this. All right. So what's interesting I highlighted here for you in yellow under the 613, this comes from the PDF document, all the different, this week, Leviticus 19, 8, that comes from 18 there, but 19. There's a lot we read this week. There was a lot of commands this week that we went through. It was very overwhelming for me in the study. Here's more. Leviticus 20, Leviticus 19, Leviticus 19, Leviticus 19, 19, 19. A whole bunch of these, all about how you are to have no other Elohim. Here is honor your father and mother. A lot came from Leviticus 19. Those who sin must be corrected. Love your neighbor, whether a brother or an enemy, as yourself, Leviticus 19. Show honor and respect for Yahuwah's appointed teachers, Leviticus 19. Become holy as Yahuwah is holy. Anyways, you can just see here a lot of commands of the 613 we went through tonight. Do not deal falsely with anyone. Do not vow falsely regarding another man's property. Do not mistreat a stranger. I could talk about these all night. Just scroll through these and you could see some of them. A bunch from stealing, a bunch of false witnesses. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the 613 commands just on false witnesses in chapter 19. Unbelievable. All right. All right. So one of the verses we read through tonight was harvest gleaning. This is fun. I couldn't pass this up, talking about Ruth, because what other time in the Torah am I ever going to talk about Ruth? And it says, and upon your harvest, the harvest of your land, you shall not completely reap the corners of your field, neither shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest. And your vineyard you shall not glean, the scattered grapes you shall not gather, you shall leave them for the wretched, poor, the meek, or afflicted, and for the stranger. Basically saying, anything that you're collecting out on your farm, if you drop it, just leave it there. And so basically you can have the poor people, as you're going through and picking, your people are picking, they can come in and they can get the extras, like maybe it's a strawberry patch, right? And you're going through and you're, picking the ripe strawberries, and you leave some behind and they can go grab them, or leave the corners of your fields. So let's give an actual example when this is done. And of course, this is Ruth, the grandmother of David, gleaning in Boaz's field. Of course, this is a love story, people, so be prepared to be romanced. Now, Naomi had a relative on her husband's side from Elimelech's family, a prominent man of substance whose name is Boaz. So he's a very wealthy man, Boaz. Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, "Please let me go out to the field and glean grain behind anyone in whose eyes I may find favor." And Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So Ruth went out and gleaned in the field behind the reapers. She just so happened to be in the field of Boaz, who was from Elimelech's family. Soon after Boaz arrived from Bethlehem, he said to the harvesters, "Adonai be with you." They replied, "May Adonai bless you." Then Boaz asked the foreman of his harvesters, "Whose young woman is this?" So he sees Ruth. She's a very pretty woman. And he's just like, "Who's this girl? I've never seen her before." And they said, "She's a Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the region of Moab." And the foreman replied, "She asked, 'Please allow me to glean and gather among the barley sheaves behind the harvesters.' So she came and has been working the field since morning until now, except for a little while in the shelter." Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Listen to me, my daughter. Do not go to glean in another field." So he's, or even pass on from here, but stay close to my female workers. Keep your eyes on the field that they are harvesting and follow after them. I strongly ordered the young men not to touch you. When you are thirsty, you can go to the jars and drink from the water the young men have drawn." Then she fell upon her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, "Why have I found favor in your eyes, that you have noticed me, even though I am a foreigner?" And Boaz replied and said to her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since your husband's death has been fully reported to me. How you left your father and mother in the land of your birth and came to a people you did not know before. May Adonai repay you for what you have done, and may you be fully rewarded by Adonai, Elohim of Yasharel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." So I grabbed this from a translation where I think what's happening is every time it says Adonai here, I think it's actually saying Yahuwah or Yahuwah, and I think they took the Lord and made it Adonai. I didn't fix it. She said, "May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your maidservant, even though I am not one of your maidservants." At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come over here and eat some bread and dip your piece into the wine vinegar." And so she sat beside the harvesters, and he held out to her roasted grain. She ate until she was full, and some was still left. When she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his workers, saying, "Let her glean even among the sheaves. Do not humiliate her." So now she's been upgraded to get the better produce. "Also be sure to pull out some grain for her from the sheaves and leave them for her to pick up, and do not rebuke her." So now he's like, okay, he's telling his workers purposely like leave some behind for her. So she gleaned in the field until evening, and then she returns home, and her mother-in-law is like, "Wow, what a big bounty you have there." And we go through the story. So point of the story is, gentlemen, you might find the love of your life gleaning in the field. So be sure to be gracious and leave plenty behind. And this is one of the ways we could love our neighbor. So speaking of which, love thy neighbor. We read in Leviticus 19, it says, "You shall not fashion wickedness, depravity, or iniquity in judgment. You shall not lift up the face of the weak, he who is hanging by a thread, not shall rashly favor the face of the official, the highly praised. Upright, honest, justly shall you judge your neighbor. You shall not walk about as a slanderer among your people. You shall not arise against the blood of your companion, for I am Yahuwah or Yahuwah. You shall not hate your brother in your heart. You shall clearly correct your neighbor and shall not carry sin over him. You shall not seek revenge and shall not guard anger against the sons of your people, but you shall have love for your companions such as you have love for yourself." I talked a little bit about this, but let's see what some other scripture has to say on this. Yaakov, the epistle of James, says, if you really fulfill the royal Torah, notice I put royal there, right, in green, because we're to be a royal priesthood. If you really fulfill the royal Torah according to the scripture, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. You are doing well. And then, of course, that sums up the whole of the Torah, right? If we love our neighbor as ourselves, we love Yahuwah and we love our neighbor. Yochanan, the Bezorah, a Gospel of John, says, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you." And of course, that's how we can fulfill the whole Torah, right? Romans 13, 8 through 10 says, "Be indebted to no one except to one another in love. For he who loves his neighbor has fulfilled the Torah. And there you see Paul, he's agreeing with Yahushua HaMashiach. He's agreeing with Yaakov, James, the brother of Mashiach. The commandments, do not commit adultery, do not murder, do not steal, do not covet, and any other commandments are summed up in this one decree. Love your neighbor as yourself. So you could look how you can look at this both ways. Some people will be like, well, they could take this abstractly and they could say, well, I love my neighbor how I want to love them. But there is a specific way to love our neighbor. And Paul just said that: do not murder, do not steal, do not covet. I mean, he just mentioned 3 of the commandments right there. And of course, again, we have the 613 to show how you don't murder, how you don't steal, how you don't covet. And he says, love does no wrong to its neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the Torah. The Gospel of Matthew 18 says, if your brother sins against you, go and confront him privately. If he listens to you, you have won your brother over. Now, I don't need to read the rest of that. I like to put longer passages in here just so you guys see that I'm not cherry picking, that I'm taking things in context. And of course, this is the famous Matthew 18 passage where you take 2 others along, and eventually you treat them as a pagan or a tax collector if they will not listen. If they refuse you, they refuse the church. But the point is that if he listens to you, you have won your brother over. That's the goal. The goal is not to excommunicate them. That's the tragedy. That is, we all sit around and we're sorrowful for this. The goal is to win our brother over, to bring them into the fold, to love one another. Yochanan 15:13 says, greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. This is why Yahushua says, let me go back up here when he says, love one another as I have loved you. And how did he love us, right? That's quite a tall order, by the way. Matthew 22 says this, and when the Pharisees heard that Yahushua had silenced the Sadducees, they themselves gathered together. One of them, an expert in the Torah, tested him with the question, teacher, which commandment is the greatest in the Torah? And of course, I just went over this. Yahushua declared, love Yahuwah your Elohim with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbors yourself. So there's the 5 and the 5, right? Separated. All the Torah and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. So for everyone out there, for you saying, see, I just have to keep those 2 commandments. But he says, wait a second, though. All the Torah, all 613 commands, precepts, ordinances, and the prophets, those are the books that come afterwards where they elaborate and explain and expound on the Torah. Those all hang on those 2. They all continue. They exist. They're true. First Yochanan, 1 John, one of my favorite books in the Bible. It says, if anyone claims to be in the light but hates his brother, he is still in the darkness. So think about that. Think about right now as you're listening to this, what person is Yah putting on your mind? Can you think of a face, a name? Is he coming to you right now, he or she? Do you have hatred towards this person, right? And if you do, according to this, we are still in the darkness. We're not in the light. Whoever loves his brother remains in the light, and there is no cause of stumbling in him. But whoever hates his brother is in the darkness and walks in the darkness. He does not know where he is going because the darkness has blinded his eyes. And that's just the thing, right? Hatred blinds us to the truth. It quenches it. It throws the bucket of water on the Holy Spirit, on the Ruach HaKodesh. First Yochanan 4:21 says, in this commandment we have from him, whoever loves Elohim must also love his brother. So there's the 5 and the 5 right there. Philippians 2:3, getting back into Paul, he says, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. That's another tall order right there. Does that not convict? I mean, this is Paul. I mean, I'm convicted by that. Like, guys, if we don't see others as more significant than us, maybe we're proud, right? That's a sign that we're proud. Let's have humility and humble ourselves and count other people as greater than ourselves. This is how we could follow Yahushua's example. Romans 15:1-6 says this, We who are strong ought to bear with the shortcomings of the weak and not to please ourselves. And this is something that in online forums and stuff, you see people stroking their own ego, their pride, and they jump all over the quote unquote shortcomings of the weak, right? The knowledge puffs them up, and they're there to please themselves and put down those who don't know as much as them, and just prove how wrong other people are. Each of us should please his neighbor for his good to build him up. So our interactions with other people in the community at Tech Discord, you guys are amazing. Okay. You guys are amazing. I love that we have a community where we are there just to share our research, build each other up. And if we disagree, we're like, I have a different opinion than you, but we can still learn from each other. And that's great. I love it when I disagree with someone who I could still pull away information and learn from it. And maybe down the line, 2 or 3 years later, I'm like, hey, all of a sudden I find myself agreeing with you. Amazing how that works. So think about that too. When someone disagrees with you, maybe it's like, maybe they will agree with you down the line. This is why we build them up, right? We don't tear them down. For even Mashiach did not please himself, but as it is written, the insults of those who insult you have fallen on me. For everything that was written in the past was written for our instruction, so that through endurance and the encouragement of the scriptures, we might have hope. Now may the Allah Hayam, who gives endurance and encouragement, grant you harmony with one another in Mashiach Yahusha. That's weird. I thought I did a clean sweep correction here. Left Jesus there. In Mashiach Jesus, so that with one mind and one voice you may glorify the Allah Hayam and Father of our Adonai Yahusha HaMashiach. Romans 15, 1-6. Back in 1 Peter, 1 Kepha says this, above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins, right? And that's the point. That's the point of Matthew 18. We're hoping to cover a multitude of sins. What does that mean? Are we turning a blind eye? No, we're not turning. We're not like, trying to bury a conspiracy here. The idea of covering over a multitude of sins is bringing them in love back into the fold, going through the process of restoration. And in this way, you celebrate, you're with a brother, you love them. And this is what's covering a multitude of sins. It means that we have stopped the transgressions from happening. We are building people up, not tearing them down. 1 Corinthians 13, 4-8. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. Of course, there's only two prime emotions, right? Love or fear. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love, just think about this. Like, your enemies, there's people out there you don't like. Maybe I'll just speak for myself. There are people out there we don't like that we need to work on, right? We need to ask Yah to, please forgive us for the way we treat other people. But ask yourself, would you rejoice that they're falling from their throne, right? They're dethroned. Maybe there's the spirit of jealousy here. Maybe this is the Azazel in us. That's a scary thought, right? Wanting to dethrone Adam. Do we rejoice when they stumble or fall? Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. This is what I love right here. This really got me when I read this today. As for prophecies, they will pass away. And you guys know that I believe that by 70 AD, prophecy was fulfilled. So I take that to mean prophecies have passed away. As for tongues, they will cease. What does he mean by that? Some people think that's like talking about the gift of tongues. No, I think that means languages. Languages have ceased. A good example of this is the Paleo Hebrew. Where in the world today are people reading speaking Paleo Hebrew? Not to my knowledge. Maybe there's some island out there that we're rediscovering it and we're going through it and learning from it, but tongues have ceased. And get this, as for knowledge, it will pass away. Guys, think about how much knowledge is gone. It's gone, completely gone. We're trying to rediscover things that have been stolen from us that is gone. Okay. Knowledge has passed away. Prophecies have passed away. tongues have ceased. And so what Paul is saying here is that the one thing that is universal, that is timeless, that we have to hold on to is love. If we don't have love, then none of this other stuff matters. All right. So when for the people out there who are going to argue, oh no, you say the Bible's fulfilled prophetically, well, blah, 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 and they just go off and off and off. And it's like, just all the arguing and the hatred and the anger out there. All right. First, Yochanan 3:18. Little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and in truth. Right? So this could be a rephrasing here of what we just read in 1 Corinthians. Prophecies will pass away. Tongues will cease. Knowledge will pass away. And then Yochanan says, let us not love in word and talk. That's what he just said, Paul. But in deed and in truth, right? In love, in action, not like romantic feelings of just, syrupy, sappy Hallmark cards, but actually in deed. First Yochanan 4:11. Beloved, if Allah so loved us, we ought to love one another. Hebrews 13:1-2 says, let brotherly love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers. This comes straight out of Leviticus 19 and 20. For thereby some have entertained angels unaware. Now that comes straight out of Sodom and Gomorrah with Lot entertaining angels unaware. Had he not gone out and been kind to those angelic visitors, he too would have died. A lot of people don't think about that. Like, we don't get any assurance that they were just knocking door to door to door, going through and going, are you righteous? Are you righteous? Like, he ran up and he disobeyed the law of Sodom in order to save them. And that's what saved him. Entertaining angels unaware. There was also a Newsboys song back from the 90s, Entertaining Angels, if you remember that. All right, so now we're finally getting to the part about talking about mixing seed. And for lack of time, so we're gonna divide this up into, in this 1919, there are 3 different things it talks about. You shall guard my statutes. You shall not allow your cattle to lie down with diverse kinds. That's 1. 2 is your fields you shall not sow with diverse kinds. That's 2. And 3 is, and a garment of diverse kinds, such as linen and wool together, shall not ascend upon you. So let's first talk about mixing seed. Now, this for the first time, I think ever, this occurred to me as I was studying this week. I was like, oh my goodness. In Genesis chapter 2, the tree of knowledge of good and evil was mixed. Now, I believe it was grapes, but look what it's mixed. It's a mix of good and evil. That right there, that's the only tree in Eden, in the garden, that was mixed. And Yahweh Elohim, the ever-living Elohim, then took the Adam and placed them in the garden of Eden for the purpose of cultivating and taking care of it. So that's interesting right there, because now it's in the context of a mixed seed of a tree, in the context of cultivating. And Yahweh Elohim, the ever-living Elohim, instructed the Adam, saying, for food you may eat of the whole of the trees of the garden, but from the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, because in the day you eat from it, dying you shall die. There's again, we saw that twice tonight in Leviticus 19, dying you shall die. Now, what I want to show here is that, again, on an esoteric level, we could take this exoterically of, oh, as long as I'm not mixing seed in my field, I'm good. But I think Yahweh wants us to go deeper than that. He wants us to say, okay, yes, okay, let's not mix our clothing. Let's not mix our seeds, don't interbreed animals. But how does the interbreeding of animals tell us about people? How does the mixing of seeds tell us about people and ourselves, right? And this is what, Barnabas pointed out in the Epistle of Barnabas. This is what the Yahudim messed up on. They thought it was all about material things and not themselves. So the big question that comes up is the tree of life. Is it, or trees of life? Many fruit or many trees? Is that confusing? Well, the thing is that if the tree of life has many different types of fruit on it, that seems to conflict with the whole of Scripture. And it seems to conflict with the Torah itself. Why would he give us a tree of life with all this different fruit on it? That's mixing fruit. That's mixing seeds. So let me read to you from the Greek Revelation here, 22:2. It says, on either side of the river stood a tree of life, having 12 kinds of fruits. What? So it's one tree with 12 kinds of fruit. We have just mixed seed. And yielding a fresh crop for each month. And the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. So this has been a commented on, kind of hush under the table commented on for a great long while. But this is one of the things when Michael and I, like 2 or 3 years ago, when with Rob as well, when we were going through Hebrew Revelation, this was the amazing thing about it. This is what the Hebrew says. And among the plains, even besides the stream, there grew up all kinds of fruit trees on both sides of its banks, namely the trees of life, plural. So when we talk about the tree of life, apparently this translation in Hebrew is saying, no, the trees of life. And on them were 12 kinds of fruit. On these trees, there were 12 different types of fruit trees that all make up the tree of life. And their fruit was for food and their foliage for healing. So that's something we don't talk about often enough. The trees of life, plural. Now, getting back to this idea of the mixed seeds, like spiritual seeds of the knowledge of good and evil, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. This is what it says in Bezorah Philip. This is amazing because this is going to tie into other things we read in Leviticus 19 and 20. There are 2 trees in the middle of the garden. One engenders animals. The other engenders humans. Adam ate from the tree that engenders animals, and he became an animal. He became animal. It is good to revere animals, for they are like the first human. The tree from which Adam ate was the tree of animals, and it bore many fruits. There is no lack of animal humans. They are many, and they revere each other. In the beginning, Elohim created humans, then humans created gods. It's almost like there's a little irony right there. The gods they created were animalistic. You get that? You get that irony? This is like so C.S. Lewis right here, where, Aslan creates Narnia and he talks to all the talking beasts. And he says, be careful that you don't become dumb beast. If you're not obedient, if you're not good, you will become a dumb beast. And this is what was promised enlightenment to Adam, but he actually became like an animal. Amazing passage. All right. So we can see that there with, again, this idea of not being like the unclean animals, right? Not being, that includes the food we eat, but also people themselves, right? Not being like animals. All right. Now let's talk about mixing animals. Same passage. Remember, the first one says, you shall not allow your cattle to lie down with diverse kinds. There's a number of ways that this can be taken, but here's one here in Deuteronomy. It says, do not plow, Deuteronomy 22:9-11 says, do not plow with an ox and a donkey yoked together. All right. So it's talking about this simple mixing right here, but there are other types of mixings. Now, I didn't have time tonight to go through all the genetic, mixing going on right now with animals. It's disgusting, all the stuff that's going out there. We know the things we're eating that we need to keep away from, and it's getting so bad. We theorize it, if not already, there's coming a time really quickly where we can't even have meat anymore. Now, I know that there's going to be the Missouri, Nebraska farmers out there who are going to say, oh, well, you just got to know the farmer. You got to know if we're returning to like the days of Noah, remember, like, we're getting to a point where even if you know the farmer, like, how do they know that those animals haven't been tampered with? How do they know? They went down to the cattle show or wherever, they got the cattle, but genetically going back, right? It's getting to the point where I was just reading an article today about even milk has been altered, like in cows, like because they think people need altered milk. It's getting outrageous. Anyways, we read this in Jubilees. This is talking about Genesis 6, and it says, and it came to pass when the children of men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the angels of Elohim. Now it says angels there. I'd like to see the Hebrew. Doesn't really matter whether it's sons of Elohim, angels, whatever. Saw them on a certain year of this Jubilee, that they were beautiful to look upon, and they took themselves wives of all whom they chose, and they bare unto them sons, and they were giants. All right, so there's Genesis 6 for you. But here's what it says in verse 2. And lawlessness increased on the earth, and all flesh corrupted its ways. All flesh. This is the mixing of seed. Alike men and cattle and beasts and birds and everything that walks on the earth, all of them were corrupted their ways and their orders. So a lot of genetic splicing probably going on here. We see the same thing in Jasher. I'm going to skip, for lack of time, running out of time, go down to verse 18. It's the theme of every week, right? I'm like, all right, I'm not going to make it. Running out of time. So again, this is the Genesis 6 account in Jasher, chapter 4. And it says, and their judges and rulers went to the daughters of men and took their wives by force from their husbands according to their choice. I really actually like that translation there. Even though it doesn't say angels, it says judges and rulers. This is how I actually picture it in Genesis. Like the men are probably being killed off. They're not just, the women aren't just lining up to be like, oh yeah, I'll go, mate with an angel. Some might, but they're just going anybody they want. They're offing the husband, killing the husband. And the husband's probably dying to defend his wife, and they're dragging the woman off and raping her. That's actually how I see Genesis 6 going down. But it says, and the sons of men in those days took from the cattle of the earth, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the air, and taught the mixture of animals of one species with the other. So, I ask myself the question a lot, do we see on record where there is a mixture of animals? Well, right here we see in the Jurassic Park films. Now, I know that this is very controversial. There's probably a divide down the middle of my viewers. Half of you probably think dinosaurs are all made up, never existed, all fake. It's all a hoax. And then there's others who go like, no, I think they exist. Now, I've looked at the evidence all around. I'll be frank, I'm really confused on the whole thing. I've looked at the evidence that they're all fake, all made up. And the other part of me thinks, no, that they legitimately did exist. And I could give a lot of evidence on both ways. And of course, you guys probably know I have the whole paper on Wastelands of the Seraphim, where I heavily imply that dragons, of course, are the seraphim angels. And this whole the dinosaur thing might be a worship of the angels. But what's interesting about the Jurassic Park films is, if you recall the first one, and they glamorize it more in the recent trilogy, the Jurassic World trilogy, but you have the Mr. DNA here, and he's talking about how they take they find the DNA in like amber, like from the mosquitoes, right? But then they use frogs, and so these are actually not real dinosaurs, right? These are not real. These are coming from frogs. It's a hybrid, a mixed animal. And they may be telling us a lot about what actual dinosaurs were. It may actually be a really interesting confession. And so I showed here, that they weren't supposed to reproduce, but because they were frogs, and frogs can be asexual, maybe go both ways, they became female dinosaurs or dragons, and they gave birth to little baby dragons. So here's one, and of course, by the time you get to the Jurassic World movies again, they're talking about how like they're just making up dinosaurs. That might be another really interesting confession too, to how the fossils work, that we know. I mean, I'll tell you right now, even though I'm looking at both ideas, and I think that these dragons really did historically exist before the flood and even before the recreation event, that I know for a fact that a lot of them are invented. I get it. Paleontology is a very corrupted field. They're just making crap up. Well, this right here is the Archaeopteryx. Now, I hope when I go on my next European kind of boots on the ground tour, that I want to go and see if it's still there in the Berlin Museum, the Berlin Archaeopteryx. And in fact, I guess the Archaeopteryx is supposed to be like a bird, a dinosaur bird that is unique to Germany, to Deutschland. And the big arguments is it a bird? Is it a dinosaur, right? Well, now I want to point out too, you notice how he's in the asphyxiated position. This is a drowned animal. This is a lot of you go like, well, no, duh, Sherlock. Well, think about this. The evolutionists who are digging up these bones all over the world, these fossils, are telling you there's no such thing as a worldwide flood. It's all mythology. It's all fiction. And yet all these dinosaurs, you guys know what I mean by that, right? Dragons. They are found in asphyxiated, drowned position in body postures. They all drown in a massive flood. And one thing that I can't get past on the side of the argument of them not existing is, why do you go to these dig sites? And some of the paleontologists will cry foul and say that they're actually tampering with the evidence. I'll give you an example. St. George, Utah. Isn't it funny? St. George and the Dragon. There's a massive dig site out there that I went to. And a lot of the young earth creationists who were there when they were digging it up originally said that you can actually go to St. George and you could see how within like 60 seconds, these floodwaters came and these animals are just walking around minding their own business. And then the waters come and you could actually see where they slip on their butt. Like you could see where they're falling over. There was actually, but they show you what they claim to be a butt imprint of a dragon. And then they start running in all directions. And as the waters sweep in, they grab them and pick them up. And then for the next like 30 or 40 or 50 feet or whatever, you could see where they are actually bashing their skins across the rocks. And you could actually see their imprints and how they're clawing to get out of the water, and they're all being drowned. And what some of the paleontologists who were there, they said that they were actually moving the pieces around on the dig site to try to make it look like this was over a placid lake over millions of years and not a flood. You see what I'm saying? So these are one of the things that when I look at this, I'm like, well, if they're making the whole thing up, then why are they making up that it was a worldwide flood and then covering that up and trying to change the story? But anyways, getting back to the Archaeopteryx, it has feathers. Is this the mixing of animals? Is this a lizard with feathers? Right? Is this where we're getting to the idea that, dragons became birds, right? Are we seeing evidence to what it's talking about in Jubilees and Jasher, that there was a tampering beforehand, and maybe that's why these didn't continue on after the flood? Maybe they were so corrupted that they were just left behind, all right, and destroyed. Maybe only the pure animals made it onto the ark. Not all animals, but the pure ones. Something to consider. I don't know. Oh, I put the feathered serpent god here, and the worship of the. Found it interesting that these, that these reptilians, these plumed serpents are worshipped all over the world. They're lizards, but they have feathers, right? Just like the Archaeopteryx. A lot of these dinosaurs they're pushing out here I actually saw this in France. In Lascaux, the cave there. Now, I have to say, I saw when you actually go to the cave now, they don't allow you to look at the actual paintings. You have to go to like the side room, and they have the replicas, which is really lame. So I guess I got excited, kind of nerd excited to see the fake Birdman. But this is probably the only depiction that has ever been found in a cave drawing of a watcher. And you could see here, it's a plumed serpent. He has a bird beak, and yes, he has an erection. I don't know what's going on. He's been killed by this bison, apparently. But anyways, are these dragons, being dug up, of whether they're real or not, or whatever's going on? Are they worship of the serpent, of the watchers? Something to think about. And were they actually corrupting animals to actually be like them? Does this make sense to everyone? Are the fossil record, is it the watchers, the seraphim angels and the watchers making creation in their image? That is the corruption going on. All right, now mixing linen and wool and naughty no. So you see, this is the third thing right here. I'm not going to go over tonight on on wool or linen. Now I am. Usually I wear like a t-shirt. You see me like wearing black or blue or orange or whatever. I dress in almost all wool. It has healing qualities. I guess I'm not wearing it tonight, but I wear a lot of wool. Of course, I wear this this kind of amber necklace as well. All healing qualities. Now, Deuteronomy says this in 22:9. It says, "Do not plant two kinds of seed in your vineyard. If you do, not only the crops you plant, but also the fruit of the vineyard will be defiled." So this is something I'm not prepared to give a study on tonight. I often long wondered, what does it mean that, like if you have a farm, surely it's not saying that you can only have one type of seed on your farm. That there has to be a separation, obviously. But that's a question for another conversation. I don't have time to go over all that tonight. If you do, not only the crops you plant, but also the fruit of the vineyard will be defiled. Do not plow with an ox and a donkey yoke together. I showed you that, but it says, do not wear clothes of wool and linen woven together. Now, linen is, it's similar to cotton. It is made from fibers derived from the stems of the flax plant instead of the bolls that grow around cotton seeds. Whereas wool, you know what that is. That comes from sheep. Wool comes from clean animals. Linen comes from the earth. So that's interesting. We got the earth. We got animals. Linen, the earth and animals mixed together. Linen and wool was forbidden. But it was a command for the layman rather than the priest. Because when we see this, I spent a lot of time looking into this today, and I still don't have answers. But in Exodus 28:6, it says the girdle of the ephod, which is upon him, according to the work thereof, this is talking about the Levite priest, he will exist the same gold, thucaloth, and aragamon, and crimson, and from white finely twisted. So it's okay. So there's 5 materials going onto the ephod, or woven together to make the ephod. The gold thread, 3 colors of dyed wool, blue, purple, and scarlet, and fine linen. That appears to be what's going on. So here you have a mixing in the ephod. The prohibition against wearing wool and linen together is overridden by the commandment of wearing a tassel, a tzitzit. And interestingly enough, in the Dead Sea, there's all these theories on the Dead Sea Scrolls and Qumran. What was going on there? Was it a community going back to the 1st century BC or the 2nd century BC? Was it a Christian community post 70 AD? Was it the Essenes? Were they temple priests? All these different theories. Was John the Baptist there? Was Yahusha there? But in the Dead Sea caves, they found clothing. What they found with the tzitzits, the tassels, they were made of white cords of linen and blue cords of wool. So it appears as though the mixing of wool and linen is forbidden for the laymen in their clothing, except for on the tassel. Now, this may be controversial for some. Okay, I'm just pointing to some historical facts here, whether it's true, whether it's correct or not. But if it is correct, it appears as though that's the amazing thing about tassels, right? That we are called to be kingdom priests. If you wear your tassel, you might not be a Levite wearing your ephod, but this is how you're a kingdom priest. Kind of interesting to think about. And so right here, this is, if you want to know what an ephod is, it's this kind of this, it's not the blue fabric, but it's this thing over on top of the blue fabric there. The tunic would be the white thing underneath. All right. But this is, I think, really what I want to get at in terms of not mixing, without talking about all the amazing things about linen or wool. Do not be unequally yoked. All right. So this is ultimately what Yahuwah is getting at. Do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. For what partnership can righteousness have with wickedness? Or what fellowship does light have with darkness? What harmony is there between Mashiach and Belial? Now, this is the one time Belial actually appears in the New Testament, but Belial is another name for Azazel. What harmony is there between Mashiach and Azazel, right? The 2 goats. He just gave you the Day of Atonement right there. Or what does a believer have in common with an unbeliever? What agreement can exist between the temple of Allahayam and idols? For we are the temple of the living, Allahayam, as Allahayam has said. I will dwell with them and walk among them, and I will be their Allahayam, and they will be my people. Therefore come out from among them and be separate, says Yahuwah. Touch no unclean thing, and I will receive you, and I will be a father to you, and you will be my sons and daughters, says Yahuwah Almighty. Believe it or not, that's a Paul passage. 2 Corinthians 6:14-18. A lot of Paul tonight. Here's another one while we're on the Paul train. This comes from Ephesians. Therefore, putting away lying, let each one of you speak truth with his neighbor, for we are members of one another. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your wrath. This is, of course, talking about loving your neighbor, but also, working with his hands what is good, that he may have something to give him who has need. Let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is for necessary edification that may impart grace to the hearers. Now I'm going to tie this in with Yaakov in a second here. And do not grieve the holy, the Ruach HaKodesh of Allah Hayam, by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Let all bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, and evil speaking be put away with you. So the idea of seeds here is the good seed and bad seed, what comes out of your mouth, right? Don't mix the holy with the profane. And we see this in Yaakov. With the tongue we bless our Adonai and Father, Allah Hayam, and with it we curse men who have been made in Allah Hayam's likeness. So this is mixing the holy with the profane. And that's, I can't say this enough. When we read the Torah, we could do the X marks the box on the letter of the law. But what we want to be keeping is the spirit of the law. And as I point out week after week, if we're keeping the spirit of the law, we're also keeping the letter of the law. The spirit of the law is like righteousness on steroids. It's hardcore righteousness. It's what we need to aspire to. The letter of the law is the easy way out. All right. Now let's talk about rounding the head and marring the beard. Now this is going to be a really controversial part, because this was hard for me to comment on, because if I were to take 10 different people and I were to all have them give their opinion on rounding the head or marring the beard, we're probably going to have 10 different opinions. All right. And I was even doing searches on this. I could not find a single website that seemed to agree. I just went to website after website and they all had different opinions on this. So it says, you shall not consume over the blood. That makes sense. Don't consume the blood. We got that. But you shall not practice enchantment or whisper sorcery, not use hidden arts. We got that. You shall not strike off, join together, or cause to go in a circle a region of your head. Now keep in mind here, this whole context is worshiping other Allah Hayam. We see that with consuming the blood, and wizards, sorcerers, right? Using the spirit of the python, as Pamela said, and shall not. Okay, so what does this mean in that context? In a circle, a region of your head, and shall not destroy or ruin a region of your beard. And an incision for the nephash you shall not place upon your flesh, and shall not place upon you writing, a mark brand on the skin. I am Yahuwah, the ever living. I've heard, interesting enough, talking about tattoos, which I'm not going to be covering tonight. I've seen Torah guys say, "Oh yeah, you can't cut the beard. You got to have a full beard, but tattoos are okay because tattoos, it says not to get them for the dead or whatever." But it's like, well, wait a second, it's the same passage. So what are we talking about here? Now, here is one I found interesting interpretation of this, a possible interpretation. Number one, marring off the corners of the beard. You can see here in this picture, this guy has literally marred off the corners of his beard. He has destroyed his skin. You can see all the lines here. He has cut into it. And this is all part of, a pagan worship. And this could very well be a possibility as they're coming into Canaan. He's like, you're going to be seeing these people who, for religious practices for their gods, they are marring off the corners of the beard. I do not want you to do that. All right. That could be one possible explanation. Now we see here in Yirmiyahu or Jeremiah 49, it says this: their camels will be taken as plunder, their vast herds will be taken as spoil. I will scatter to the four winds those desert peoples. So a very specific group of people who cut their hair short at the temples. So the cutting, it doesn't specify. It's probably talking about beards. But it seems this is a big issue for Yahuwah that they're doing this at the temples. All right, that's the context. Again, we see in chapter 9 of Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu, it says, behold, the days are coming, declares Yahuwah, when I will punish all who are circumcised, yet uncircumcised. He's talking about Yehuda and Yasharel. Egypt, Judah, Yehuda, Edom, Ammon, Moab, and all the inhabitants of the desert who clip the hair of their temples. For all these nations are uncircumcised, and the whole house of Yasharel is uncircumcised in heart. So there again is the cutting of the hair, and this idea that they are, they may or may not be circumcised in the flesh, but they're clearly uncircumcised in heart. And the days are coming that they will be punished. We see one more passage here in Yirmiyahu 25, and you can see highlighted here for lack of time. I'm just going to read this highlighted part. It says, Dedan, Tima, Buzz, and all who cut the corners of their hair. All right. Another possible explanation for the corner of the beard is literally not shaving the beard off, And it has to do with a kind of a circumcision argument that in historical artwork, really ancient artwork, when you see people, grown men with no beards, it almost always depicts a eunuch. And for whatever reason, in ancient Mesopotamian logic, you cut it off down there because you're conquered, and maybe you're maybe the king does this because he wants to make sure that his little princess isn't abused, or his wife. He wants to be able to trust the men around him that he's not going to seduce his women. He makes you a eunuch, and a sign of being a eunuch is you have a cleanly shaven face. I don't know. That's something to consider. That was one of the explanations I came across. And interesting enough, in Deuteronomy 23, it says, no one whose testicles are crushed or whose male organ is cut off shall enter the assembly of Yahuwah. Speaking of the eunuchs. So maybe this is a total disgust to Yah having a clean-shaven face. But I do want to point out here in Isaiah 39:7, it says, and some of you and some of your own sons who will come from you, whom you will father, shall be taken away. This is talking about the judgment over Yehuda. And they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon, right? So that's a problem. But then read what he says in chapter 56. Let not the foreigner who has joined himself to Yahuwah say, Yahuwah will surely separate me from his people. And let not the eunuch say, behold, I am a dry tree. That's an interesting way to put it, a dry tree. For thus says Yahuwah, to the eunuchs who keep my Sabbaths, who choose the things that please me and hold fast my covenant, I will give in my house and within my walls a monument and a name better than sons and daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that shall not be cut off. A lot of play on words there. Dry tree, getting cut off. But he says, look, if you're a eunuch and it's cut off, hey, look, if you keep my Sabbaths and you keep to my covenant, I'm going to give you something better than sons and daughters. I'm going to give you a monument better than that. That's quite a monument. I don't know. I can't even imagine what that's like, because having sons and daughters is quite a monument in itself, right? It's actually your blood. That's your very flesh that's continuing on. So it's something better than your blood and flesh that he's going to give you. That's an exciting thought. I can imagine it's an exciting thought for any eunuchs out there. I myself am not a eunuch. As proof, I have 3 children. But all right, let's look at another possible interpretation of the rounding of the head. And this is what I think it's talking about, because I think that when he says don't round off, no, I'm not solved on the beard issue, the marring. I really don't know. I don't know if we should, I think personally, I think it's okay to not have a beard. I really do. But I don't want to, everybody needs to search that out for themselves. I don't want to tell you guys to disobey a command, if that makes sense, right? Everybody needs to come to their own conclusions on that. Now, in terms of this, I think that this is what it's referring to. We see modern practices here. Here's a photo. I don't know when that was taken, 1800s, early 1900s. I don't know. It looks like it could have been maybe like one of the island countries. It could be Africa. I'm not really sure where that is. But we see here in the Egyptian society, I think the skull comes from Peru. So we see it happening in South America. We see it happening in Africa. We see it happening throughout the Mesopotamian region in Egypt. And of course, this is probably so you see here, like I love this one with is it Nefertiti? I think her name was, the priestess, Pharaoh's wife. Was she a pharaoh officially at one point? Her elongated skull, like they had these long hats because they had elongated skulls. What does that mean? Were they actually gods themselves, like, in terms of like Nephilim type creatures, or were they simply rounding their skulls to look like them? That's, obviously a lot of people were, right, to look like the god. So this is a part of God worship that he clearly did not want from us. All right. And do I want to progress on? Okay. Well, we'll end on this unpleasant thought tonight, sex with animals. So what I want to show here is that the letter of the law, okay, everybody listening, I hope that everybody listening has never had intercourse with an animal, all right? So give yourself a round of applause. You've just obeyed the letter of the law. Good. But let's talk about the spirit of the law, all right? Sex with animals of another kind, all right? This is much harder to keep. And it says in the Gospel of Philip, a bridal chamber is not for the animals. Remember what he said earlier about how Adam ate from a tree of many fruits that made him an animal? Nor is it for slaves, nor for defiled women, but it is for free men and for virgins, the bridal chamber. All right. So we're talking about a different type of sex with animals here. Clearly, that's taking this concept in Leviticus and it's upping it to like this whole different holy action on our part. And again, we saw this. I already showed you this in Bezor Philip 84. Adam ate from a tree. He became an animal. It bore many fruit. All right. This comes from Scivius. This was once again the German medieval mystic, Hildegard. She was a woman. And she says, but that fornication, which is commonly done by people, is abominable in my sight. Now, I say she's saying that she's claiming that Yah is actually speaking these words to her. For I created male and female from the beginning in integrity and not in wickedness. Therefore, those hypocrites who say it is lawful for them to commit fornication with animal appetites, with whomever they wish, are unworthy of my eyes, because despising the honor and loftiness of their rationality, they look to the beast and make themselves like them. Woe to those who live so and persevere in this wickedness. You guys get that? It's straight up saying that this is the I think the spirit of the law here, right? Like, yes, I mean, we've never had sex with horses and dogs, but have we had intercourse with beasts? How we ourselves become like the beast, right? And had fornication, adultery with Yahuwah. That's a much more sobering thought, a very different way to take the Torah. It's a much more deeper level of penetrating it. And again, here's the epistle of Barnabas. And I told you about this earlier tonight. He says, concerning meats, then Moshe received 3 decrees to this effect, and uttered them in a spiritual sense. But they accepted them according to the lust of the flesh, as though, I gave a bad translation here, should say as though they refer only to eating. He's not dismissing eating meat, but clearly, so there's a deeper meaning to all these laws. Last week I ended with the movie E.T., and I kind of just skimmed over it really quickly. I was talking about the moon child, and I don't know why I was thinking about this, but reading Leviticus 20, the movie The Shining, the horror film, the Stanley Kubrick film, kept coming to my mind, because you're actually in this movie, you are blending 3 things into one coherent narrative that they're talking about. So before I take you through all these pictures, the 3 things we see is familiar spirits, zoophilia. I've never heard anyone say zoophilia in my life. Apparently that's the official name for bestiality, and parent-child sex relations. So we see here, like a man that lies down with a male as he lies down with a woman, and in the same context, and a man who takes for himself a woman and her mother. So the idea of, sex with your children is forbidden. I mean, that should be a given. Having familiar spirits is forbidden, as well as bestiality. So we see here in this movie where, everyone thinks of it as a ghost story, but the ghosts themselves are a reflection of the reality that the wife, her name is Wendy. Of course, I read the book. That was one of the first adult books I ever read back in the 90s. She realizes in her husband, Jack, right? So you see here this idea of the bears. You see that the boy, Danny, is getting therapy in the beginning of the film. You see a therapist there. They can't figure out, there's something wrong with this boy. They can't figure it out. You see him lying on a bear. In his room, interestingly enough, there are these 2 bears over his bed. We also see a fascination with the bearskin rug, and there's a lot of bears in the narrative. And one of the big thing with the connection with the bear is when Wendy finally sees the ghost, and there is a bear having intercourse with a man in the bedroom. And the sad thing is that the bear represents the boy. And she realizes the horror that she realizes that her husband is having improper relations with his child. And in fact, the magazine that he's reading in there, the article, as very attuned viewers to the movie have pointed out, the article is incest: why parents sleep with their children. And so that's, where the horror is in there. That just came to my mind, thinking I'm a very abstract thinker. I'm a very analytical person. And so I think about the arts in these ways. But anyways, and it says that, a man, I guess he was frozen. He wasn't burned with fire, but he was destroyed at the end of the film. Good riddance. He was an evil, wicked dude. And I think that concludes there's okay, bye. So that concludes the Torah portions tonight. Thank you, everybody, for being a part of this and making this a weekly tradition in your home. And I know that a lot, as I say every week, this is the Bible, baby. I mean, there's a lot of unpleasant things to talk about in here. But I'm hoping that I'm able to, I don't know. I've been convicted on things as I go through this. I'm just like, oh man, I just think about things in my life and, about being angry at a brother or a neighbor, or, am I a good enough neighbor? Am I loving people? Am I, Yah puts these people on my mind of who I have wronged and I need to go out and ask for forgiveness of, and these kind of things. And I hope that I'm able to do this for you guys as well. Go through this and show you that this is not just some ancient letter of the law that doesn't apply to us. I'm not telling you to go out and become a Jew or, just live like some desert nomad, right? We're taking these and applying them to our lives today and showing that they are still completely applicable in who we associate with and how we ourselves act around other people. And we want to be a salt and light, right? We want to be a life to others. So love you guys. We'll do this again next week. As always, see you guys around. Have a restful Sabbath, everybody.